Go to the Knesset, go to the floor of the Knesset, listen to the debates there, and your criticism of the policies of the state of Israel, sometimes very severe criticism coming from the opposition. No, and I think it's very dangerous to label all criticism of the state of Israel or policies of the government as anti-Semitic. What I think what happens is if someone has a myopic, a blinded view of all the human rights crises in the world and only sees the one in Israel and doesn't see things in China and doesn't see things in Saudi Arabia or doesn't see things in other countries, many of which countries which Israel doesn't want to compare itself to and doesn't want to be compared to, but says this is the only human rights problem in the world, that just makes me wonder.
Do you feel that the BDS movement is anti-Semitic?
And I would say that the founders of BDS, the founders who founded the movement, their objective is the destruction of the state of Israel. There's no question about it. And that right now, with their spread of BDS, they're not going to get any country or any university to boycott Israel officially. There'll be unofficial boycotts. We just won't invite that professor from Hebrew University to come lecture, a university in America might say. But it's the toxification of Israel, making Israel toxic. But there are people who support BDS. There are people, particularly students, who think of BDS as an effort to get a country which they believe is engaging in a human rights abuse to change its policies. I don't think they're anti-Semitic, and I think to immediate label them, you're BDS, ipso facto you're anti-Semitic, is wrong.
What do you think about the recent resolution which was adopted in the German Bundestag denouncing BDS?
While I appreciate their strong condemnation of the anti-Semitic attacks on Israel, I think to immediately label all supporters of BDS as ipso facto anti-Semites might have gone too far. I don't think the resolution itself will make that much of a difference, sadly, but I think what we're going to see in years to come is an intensification of the BDS movement, an intensification of all sorts of attacks on Israel.
Among the young generation.
Younger generations and the not so young, professors and others, because it'll just be easier. You know, we want a specialist on mosaic floors in Byzantine churches. We don't have to invite the person from Hebrew University. We'll invite the person from Yale. Or we have a graduate student who's coming from Israel. We have 5 applications. We have 4 places. We just won't take that student. I think it's going to be much more subtle and harder to fight.
How do you perceive, what do you think about the close relations between Israel and countries like Hungary, Poland?
Brazil, Hungary and Poland especially problematic. Look, I understand realpolitik. I speak as a professor. I'm not responsible for a country. I'm not responsible for all those kind of things. But I think it's very problematic when you make common cause with countries such as Poland, such as Hungary, who have engaged, or countries where the leaders have engaged in efforts that, to my mind, are rooted in anti-Semitism, rooted in rewriting the history of the Holocaust. And you praise them as great fighters against anti-Semitism. Take Viktor Orban in Hungary. His attack on George Soros relies on anti-Semitic imagery, relies on anti-Semitic tropes, memes, whatever word you want to use. You can disagree with George Soros. You can disagree with him on his financial policies. You can disagree with him on his social policies. But the way that fight has been constructed is to very much rely on his Jewish identity, as a signal to the Hungarian people. Or take the case in Poland, the attempt to make it illegal to talk about the collaboration of the Poles in the Holocaust. I know the law says Polish nation, but it's very ambiguous what is meant by that. Yes, of course, there were Polish rescuers. Go to Yad Vashem and you see over 6,000 Polish rescuers, close to 7,000, I believe. But there were Poles who turned Jews in. There were Poles who turned Jews in for a couple of zlotys. There were Poles who ratted on Jews. There were Poles who attacked Jews. And to rewrite the history so that your nation is thought of, Polish nation is thought of only as victims and not the least bit as having done something wrong, A, is untrue, and B, rewrites the history. So when the Israeli government welcomed the so-called changes in the law, which were cosmetic changes, read the statement of the Yad Vashem historians against this. It's the first time ever that Yad Vashem, a government institution, a state institution, which has always avoided politics, came out against something the government did. And it's what I call soft core denial. It's not denying the facts, but it's rewriting the facts. And I think it's very dangerous for, that doesn't mean that Israel has to break relations with them or whatever, but for Israel to welcome, for the government of Israel to welcome those kind of developments, to overlook the overt anti-Semitism of a Viktor Orban, who's also rewriting the history of the Shoah so that the Hungarian people are not complicit, is very wrong.
Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the British Labour Party, is he anti-Semite?
He very well might be, but I think that's the wrong question. It's immaterial to me what Jeremy Corbyn thinks in his heart. I don't care what he thinks in his heart. I look at what he does. And he has never met an anti-Semite that he hasn't been willing to embrace, unless they're wearing the uniform of an SS or a neo-Nazi, some sort of neo-Nazi paraphernalia. But he has welcomed Holocaust deniers. He has engaged with Holocaust deniers. He has engaged with overt anti-Semites over and over again. And he has refused to take anti-Semitism seriously. Even though he says, I abhor anti-Semitism, I can. The only anti-Semitism he recognized is that of the neo-Nazi goose-stepping down, Piccadilly Circus in the heart of London.
Do you believe that President Trump inspires anti-Semitic atmosphere?
I think if he doesn't inspire it, knowingly inspire it or consciously inspire it, I think he tolerates it, he condones it, he emboldens the anti-Semites. The anti-Semites on the far right are convinced, they say, he can't say it openly, he can't say it publicly. They are convinced he agrees with them. He has engaged in dividing the United States, whipping up hostility towards minority groups and others. And that often follows, with that comes anti-Semitism. Let me put it this way. Every anti-Semite on the far right is convinced, or I believe every anti-Semite on the far right is convinced that Donald Trump agrees with them. He has a Jewish son-in-law, he has a Jewish daughter, he has Jewish grandchildren who attend Jewish schools, and etc. So I don't think personally he may be I don't think he's personally an anti-Semite. But I think he has to turn around to those people on the far right and say, you don't speak in my name. I don't believe in what you stand for. And if you associate me with what you believe, you're making a big mistake. And that hasn't happened. So I think it has emboldened them.
I thank you very much,
Thank
Professor
you for having
Deborah
me.
Lippman.
My pleasure.